good afternoon. This is Houndog Steve wishing you a very pleasant afternoon. And I'd just like to draw your attention to an article here about how the IMF and the World Bank is now calling for a steep recession in 2023. And they're sort of chiding people that, well, these are warnings that we gave back 6 months ago, and now they've become our worst case scenarios, our baseline, and blah-de-blah-de-blah, as if they couldn't have seen that some of the actions that they were heralding and encouraging, such as the lockdowns, which cause all kinds of supply chain disruptions, the printing of money during the lockdowns, just a massive printing of money, and they couldn't see that that wasn't going to create huge amounts of inflation, that shutting down the Dutch farmers wasn't going to cause issue in the food department. Here, take a look at this about Dutch farmers. Okay, this from Breitbart. Dutch farmers promise fresh protests after government backs plan to forcibly seize farmland. And this is from Farmers Forum. Eastern Ontario. Ontario farmers continue to be concerned about Dutch farmers as the Netherlands government presses ahead to shrink herd size and impose fertiliser cuts, and now expropriate 3,000 farms whilst paying out 120% of market value for the properties. But it goes on to say, according to media reports, Dutch taxpayers will pay about $37.7 billion Canadian on the farm buyout. Farmers subject to expropriation have until sometime in 2023 to accept the offer or cease farming their property. If that isn't an open threat to accept the gift, take the carrot, or get whacked with a stick. I mean, this is what they always do. They put you behind the 8 ball and force you to make a decision that you don't want to make, and then they'll say, well, you made a decision. But they made it an impossible decision. How the Netherlands has become the world's second largest food exporter. The Netherlands, the 6th largest economy in the European Union, plays an important role as a European transportation hub with a persistently high trade surplus, stable industrial relations and moderate unemployment. Industry focuses on food processing, chemicals, petroleum refining and electrical machinery. A highly mechanized agricultural sector employs only 2% of the labour force but provides large surpluses for food processing and underpins the country's status as the world's second largest agricultural exporter. And they couldn't see back then, you know, that pulling the plug on the Dutch farmers was seriously going to disrupt our entire world food chain. That supplying money to Ukraine wasn't going to disrupt the whole fertilizer chain and supply mechanism. The dislocation of Russia through sanctions wasn't going to have an absolutely massive effect on manufacturing of parts and supplies and supply chain issues. So to pretend that they were warning us 6 months ago, when really they should have been warning our governments worldwide 2 and 3 years ago that the path that they were on was not going to work. Now, I just want to point out here that all of these agencies, whether it is the IMF, the WEF, the Bank of International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, all of the central banks in the different countries, all of these NGOs, they're all joined at the hip one way or another, and they all support each other's decisions. So when the WHO makes a decision about a pandemic, all the rest just fall in line. And of course the WEF have got them signed on now with the ESG, the Environmental Sustainable and Governance, kind of social credit for corporations. And so they're all walking in lockstep here. So to try and say to the public that you did not know that this was going to be the end result is absolutely ludicrous. Anyway, let's just pop over to this article. It's just a short article, and we'll come back and I'll do a quick wrap up. Okie dokie, here we go. And this from Zero Hedge. World Bank warns global economy perilously close to falling into recession. 6 months ago, the World Bank slashed its global growth outlook for 2022 and 23 to positive 2.9% and positive 3% respectively, blaming the war in Ukraine, lockdowns in China, supply chain disruptions and the risk of stagflation for hammering growth. Today, in its latest report on global economic prospects, the World Bank has slashed its growth forecast for 2023 by almost a half to just 1.7%, led by weaker growth in all the world's top economies, United States, Europe and China. Global growth has slowed to the extent that the global economy is perilously close to falling into recession, the World Bank said. That would mark the third weakest pace of global growth in nearly 3 decades, overshadowed only by the 2009 and 2020 downturns. The World Bank called on global central banks to remain alert to the risk that aggressively tightening monetary policy to fight inflation could spill across borders. The new report called for discussions between central bankers to help mitigate risks associated with financial stability and avoid an excessive global economic slowdown in the pursuit of inflation objectives. Weakness in growth and business investment will compound the already devastating reversals in education, health, poverty and infrastructure and the increasing demands from climate change, said David Malpass, president of the World Bank. For now, those central bankers are facing their nemesis, stagflation. Though the United States might avoid a recession this year, the World Bank predicts the US economy will eke out growth of just 0.5%. Global weakness will likely pose another headwind for America's businesses and consumers, on top of high prices and more expensive borrowing rates. The United States also remains vulnerable to further supply chain disruptions if COVID keeps surging or the war in Ukraine worsens. As I said, you didn't know this? And also the biggest problem here that you're not talking about is the amount of personal debt that people are carrying and the effect that the increase in costs are going to inflict on these poor people. And Europe, long a major exporter to China, will likely suffer from a weaker Chinese economy, projecting that the EU's economy won't grow at all next year, having expanded 3.3% in 2022. It foresees China growing 4.3%, nearly a percentage point lower than it had previously forecast, and about half the pace that Beijing posted in 2021. And I just have to remind you here that all of these reports come from reports made by the countries themselves based on statistics that they make up to give themselves a glowing report. So, none of these are actually very accurate, but they are. The direction is accurate, but they're likely worse than they're putting out here. The risks that we warned of 6 months ago have materialized, and our worst-case scenario is now our baseline scenario, says Ian Coase, the World Bank economist responsible for the report. The world's economy is on a razor's edge and could easily fall into recession if financial conditions tighten. If the World Bank's gloomy prognosis was realized, the current decade would become the first since the 1930s to experience 2 global recessions. The report follows a similarly gloomy forecast a week earlier from Kristina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, the global lending agency. Georgieva estimated on CBS Face the Nation that 1/3 of the world will fall into recession this year. Yeah, I think it's a lot more than that, my dear. And this is what you're going to find that these people are going to do. Our Deputy Prime Minister is off to Davos and is saying that the WF is stating that income is going to be, cost of living is going to be the biggest crisis in the globe this coming year. And of course there's no conflict of interest, that she's going over there as the chair of the WEF and making decisions about our country and our future. But, as I say, all of these groups are all joined at the hip and they all try to sell you that they've got the big plan for the next century. But they couldn't see 2 years ago what anybody, a blind man, could have seen what was going to happen with the actions of the last 2 years. And I want to point this out because we need to start actually critically thinking about these organizations and what they're doing and what they're saying and what they're trying to get you to do, and how they will try and roll back this narrative 1984 style so it makes it look as though, well, we predicted it all along, and, well, you know, if you couldn't follow our regulations and follow our advice, well, you know, there's not a lot we can do. Yeah, okay, we got it. But that's not the case. But history will remember it that way unless we remember, we regain our memories, and remember what has happened in the last 2 years, and in fact over the last, I don't know how many decades of bamboozlement and, you know, double meanings, you know, this double speak, double think situation going on within our organizations is absolutely unbelievable. Anyway, we cannot afford to get gulled by this. Like I say, why would you impose such restrictions and forced compulsory acquisition of farms on a country that produces 50% of the food? You know, no logistics person in their right mind would advise that kind of behavior. Just the same as cutting off your gas pipeline, your complete energy source, when you don't have a backup. You've got nothing in place to replace what you're losing. You know, who makes those kind of decisions? And this is not like an individual person in an individual home making a bad decision that will reflect on them. No, these are people in positions of power who are making bad decisions that won't reflect on them and will reflect on you. And you'll see as this winter progresses, and I'm figuring as we get towards the end of January and the first fill-up, propane, fuel oil, or what have you, takes place, because we're getting into some cold weather now, that's when you're going to start seeing the shock wave and the realization. The food prices are astronomical right now. $100 buys you nothing anymore. And yes, to try and tell us that they didn't know is insane. Do not fall for that, ladies and gentlemen. And where this is going to end up, I hate to think, but I would be getting some seeds and thinking about planting them this year, and about buying food locally off your farmers. This farm to fork idea, your local farmers markets, that kind of stuff. Plan to attend these this year to try and bypass some of the effect and fallout. You see, same with the compulsory purchase. Do it or die. You got no choice. They say we offer you a choice, and you made that decision, but that's not really a choice. And that's how this always seems to work. So you have to prepare yourself. We have to prepare ourselves to go through a bit of a long haul as far as food and other things are concerned, whilst you're still paying or trying to pay your existing bills for living, like your mortgage, your heat, hydro, that kind of stuff. Anyway, I hope this finds you well, and in the meantime, this is Houndog Steve signing off, wishing you a very pleasant afternoon, and we'll talk very, very shortly. You take care now. See ya. Bye.